Hello everyone, this is Andrew Fullen from Sogeti Labs, and with me today I have Eva, and we're going to be talking about the Agile coach and their role as translator. Will be time for some questions towards the end, and you can also add questions in as you go along through the chat window, and we'll try and respond to them. We'll also be using Mentimeter during all of this, so that there'll be a chance for you to be interactive with us and fire some responses back to some of the questions that we're going to sort of bring in front of you today. So we'd like to start with introducing Eva. If you'd like to sort of say a little bit about yourself, tell everyone who's listening who you are, a little bit about yourself and what we're going to talk about today.
Yes, welcome everybody. Nice to meet you. I'm working at Society in Sweden for now, and I have worked with IT and system development since 1991. And all the time with both development and quality assurance and testing. So I'm 53 years old, lives in Jönköping, a small town in Sweden. And I was born in Göteborg, which is the second largest city in Sweden. I'm also an author, so I have written practice mjukvaru testing, it's called in Swedish, and that more or less means software testing in practice. And I'm also an author of science fiction and fantasy novels. Today we are going to talk about test manager as a quality translator and coach, which is a kind of another role that we take on in the agile development area. So that's what we are going to talk about today.
That's great. Thank you, Eva. And I'll have to ask you about your science fiction and fantasy sometime. That's always a topic of interest, I think, to a few of us who are on these sort of calls. We seem to have a few authors amongst us. So I thought we could start with one of the Menti questions, if we could, which is, what's the most important task for a test manager, in the opinion of all of you who are listening today, in an agile setting? And we're going to use the word cloud format. So this should hopefully be on the screen, and unfortunately due to an update on my machine I can't see the screen, a link to a Menti page, and in there will be a code that you can enter in and then respond. Are you able to see it, Eva?
Yes. So we see the picture below on the side.
So we'll give it a few moments for people to be able to actually add in their responses. Now, I can't see the number, Eva. Could you share the number? Did it appear on your screen?
It's 62105840. So that is 62105840.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
You're welcome. See if we get any answers here.
Yeah. Well, I've put in a couple of answers for myself now, so hopefully we'll have at least a couple of those.
Yeah, now they are coming. Quite interesting, and a lot of the kind of tasks that I also think is the most important. Do you see the screen, Andrew?
Unfortunately, I don't know. So I have a completely blank screen because my computer is updating and I've stopped it halfway through. So all I have is a picture of yourself and a picture of myself. So I'm ad-libbing crazily at the moment.
Yeah, so I'll read some of them that I think is quite interesting. You have to the coordination and the communication. which is two of my main tasks as well. I think we're going to talk a bit about that later on as well. I think that's a really important task for the test manager. Quality orchestration is also something that is among the task, and that's also a very important task. So you have a lot of fairly important parts of a test manager role, like release advice, test strategy, quality assurance, whole process management, teach test is for all, etc., 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 and coaching as well. So it's too many answers to read them all, but a lot of interesting here.
Fortunately, the update is now allowing me to see the screen. So
Great.
I'm in a much better position than I was just a few moments ago. So thank you to the gods of ITIX for reaching out to me and correcting whatever was causing that problem. Now, I suppose really we want to sort of drill down a little bit into your topic today and start with like the sort of first question, because I think the role of the test manager has changed an awful lot from what it was even 10 years ago, and probably out of all recognition to what it was 20 years ago, even if there were not many test managers then. What do you think has been the sort of the biggest changes for test managers?
I think actually the purpose of a test manager is more or less the same, because it's to help achieve the correct quality for our users and for our stakeholders. But how we achieve that purpose has changed a great deal, because if you look at 10 years ago, it was mostly those with the title of tester and test manager that did most of the testing. Of course, developers has always done a fair amount of testing, but it was looked upon like it was the tester's job to do the testing. Nowadays, it's the whole team that is responsible for the quality, and as a test manager, we are supporting the team in that role and making the team make the best decisions to be able to achieve a correct quality with a correct ambition level and so on. So that means that the emphasis has turned towards even more communication and cooperation than before. Because before there were instances that a lot of communication was done through documents and so on. A good test manager has never relied on just documentation. But that was the common perception of a test manager's role, more or less, that it was a lot about documentation. And now the perception of a role has changed, and you need to work together with others to help them achieve equality. So it's more a cooperation role than before. So I think that's the main change.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I remember, I think my first time as a test manager being given a great big pile of documents, told, read that, that's what you've got to do. Don't talk to the developers. If it's not in the document, it's not a problem. That has very much changed. Do you think the needs of the test manager have changed at the same time?
What do you mean by the needs of a test manager?
So it started off that the test manager had a very clear function of, I have this pile of documents, I read them, and we make sure these things work, or there's some bugs. You know, I think that's changed quite a lot, because we didn't talk to developers very often. We rarely talked to users until it was like the user acceptance phase or afterwards.
Yeah, actually, I don't think my way of working has changed so much, because I've always talked with developers and users and so on. But you have right; it was very emphasis on the documentation, and in a way, you are right, because the needs of a test manager has changed in that way but before you could kind of fit into a square box. And nowadays you don't have that square box. You need to look at what we need to achieve and find ways of achieving it together with all the rest of the people. So it's not such a cut and such a clear set of tasks that you need to perform. You need to do what needs to be done in the way it needs to be done in that moment that it needs to be done. So you can't look at a list and see, well, if I do these kinds of things, I've done my job. Because there are not that checklist that you need to fulfill. So in that way, the needs have changed. You need to be more flexible and more adaptable than before, I think.
I think so. I mean, I remember starting and it was just try this application out and write down on a bit of paper or a sticky note everything that went wrong and we'll fix it. Then we went to spreadsheets and then we got the occasional tool to record the defects. And now everything has changed so much, it seems.
It has, and I think the knowledge base you need to have has grown as well, because you need to understand the technology that the system is depending on and how it is depending on other systems, the architectural and all those questions. But you also need to understand the business needs and how they are working, and you need to understand how people works to be able to communicate in an efficient way, and you need to understand the processes and so forth, and the operations, and etc. and etc. and etc. And I think the trick is to realize that, well, you need to understand a lot of things, but you can't know everything. You need to cooperate with others that have a detailed, specified knowledge in, and kind of communicate with them to know what to be done. So you can't sit and think that you can have all the answers yourself. You are more a catalyst, a facilitator, a coach that can, together with others, achieve the goal. So you don't think that you need to know everything yourself, because I think that can be a very daunting task.
No, I completely agree. And it leads on to probably the next question I'd like to ask you. What's the most important aspect for the test manager role now, in your opinion?
I would say it's the communication and the cooperation, because you need to have those ways of communicating with everybody. And it's quite easy if you are just working with a small team and with a couple of stakeholders and so on. But if you are working in a very complex environment where you have several different systems and it's different teams that are developing the different systems that need to communicate, and you have different businesses and a lot of different persons, a very large organization, it can be very tricky to make all those communications work. Because if you're sitting in the same room, you can just turn around and talk to a developer or talk to a subject matter expert. But if you are sitting in different parts of the world and it's a very large organization, you really need to step out of your comfort zone and kind of establish those communication pathways to be able to
it's probably got worse as well with COVID and lockdown. Even fewer face-to-face interactions and more remote interactions.
Yeah, and if you are kind of shy and hesitant to reach out, it can be very tricky. So you need to make sure that you have that communication in place. And of course, you could have barriers. You have suppliers, and the suppliers have suppliers in their turn, and so on. So that can make it very, very hard to actually find the people you want to talk to and need to talk to.
It's almost a complete supply chain wrapped up in a testing project.
Yeah, it is. And it's getting more and more complex.
Do you think it's a good thing? It's getting more and more complex, or do you think maybe we need to stop the complexity a little bit?
I think you can't stop the complexity total, because nowadays one of the biggest changes is that the value change has grown. So in order for the user to actually get the value of a system, you have systems of system and systems, and you have devices that you don't have control over. So you can't have control of every aspect of it. And I don't think that we ever are going to go back to that. You don't just have one supplier that kind of relieves the whole of the value, because that means that we can't get the functionality that we have grown used to.
No, I think you're probably right there. So moving on, we've got a second Menti question set up, and that's going to be, in the opinion of the audience today, what's the main purpose of test? So if you go to Menti and you can enter the code, which I can now fortunately see, which is 62105840, then there's a question there for you, which is, what's the main purpose of testing? I'm certainly going to type in that as well. So I've put mine in at least. So we'll have at least one or two things coming through.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got a good few coming through now.
We do.
And it looks like although there's a lot of different words being used there, it looks like we're talking about a lot of very much the same things going on there as well.
Yeah, but we choose different words to describe it.
Yeah. What's sort of standing out to you? Because I mean, it's a really good sort of mixture of answers there. You know, they're all good answers as well.
Yeah, you have some here that I think is really interesting, and that's gather information, learn about the product, advise stakeholders, and so on. And all of us is surrounding the information part of testing.
Yeah. Like third eye.
I think is
I've not seen that before as an answer.
No, that's really interesting, actually.
But it's a good image, a good metaphor, actually having that third eye, that extra wisdom to be able to see more than other people. And I like that one. Well done to whoever put that one in. You've given me an answer I didn't expect to see. Validation, trust, business value. I mean, it does seem to be very much around having a system that people trust because we can prove that we've done what we should be doing and that it works in the right way, that it's done in a way that people can make informed decisions. And, you know, we've got the quality, we can support the stakeholders so they can make decisions, give the feedback. And again, someone's got excellence in there, which is, I think, a really good thing to have in there, and one that needs to go alongside things like quality and trust. So thank you very much, everyone, for those. That was a really good sort of word cloud. I like that one.
Me too.
Eva, really, you know, we've talked there about the main purpose of test. But what do you mean when you talk about a test manager as a quality translator? Because that's part of the title of what we're talking about today. What's a quality translator for you?
Yeah, and I think this is a very important part of a test manager job, because you have a lot of, as you said in the mentor question, testing is a lot about gathering information to know more about the system that we are testing, and to gain the confidence and the trust and so on. So that all circles around the information part. But the thing is that every test activity done, whether it's review or a dynamic test or an automatic test or what it is, you get information in the phase of a result, but the result is often unclear and not very clear what they actually means. So if you just look at the results that you get from tests and reviews and so on, you're actually not getting any information about the quality status of the system. And you don't get enough information to know what to do about it. So for me, a test manager need to act as a quality translator to use all these inputs and kind of answer the question, what means this? What this how should I interpret this information? Because it's a lot of different facts and some of them are not consistent. And so what is actually the quality situation of a system, and what possible actions can we do to move more to the goal that we have, so we actually achieve the purpose of a system and it gives the value that we need to give.
You had a good point there, because you hit the goal of the system, and yeah. I think a developer's goal compared to stakeholders, compared to a customer's goal, can be quite different. So do you see the test manager translating what these goals are from the different stakeholders, the different stages in the product life cycle together into something that everyone can understand the other point of view?
Yeah, exactly. And you don't only have the users and the stakeholders and the business and so on. You also have the operations part of it, because this system needs to work in operation. It needs to be operable. So you need to look at all these different perspectives and look at it and kind of explain both for specific individuals working with systems like the development team, but also the stakeholders and those people who are actually making the decision how to move forward. And that kind of is a test manager's job. So you need to be able to communicate in different languages, because the business doesn't talk exactly the same language as development, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, that leads almost to the old sort of joke about it compiled on my machine, therefore it works, therefore it is a quality piece of code, all the way through to it worked in test to why is production crashing? And everyone's still seeing that they've done the right things, and you have to bring it together. So how do you work as that quality translator? How do you go about getting that message across to all of the different stakeholders, all of the different people who are involved in it? How do you make them see what good is where they are and for everybody else?
Yeah, and one way of working with this is to work with transparency. I want everybody to know how the situation is, so we don't have layers of in this kind of team we know certain aspects, and the stakeholders know certain aspects, but they don't know everything in between. So I'm trying to merge them together, so I kind of give the same information but in different ways in the different kind of people I talk to. So we have transparencies everywhere, so we don't kind of hide not good information. Because one very big problem in a lot of system development projects is that it's green, everything is green, everything is green, and then you hit when the release should have been, and then everything is red and you can't deploy. So I'm trying to work that we always know how the situation is and try to get information from all the other sources and kind of get a full picture of the situation as it really is, not as they wish it were, which is also something that we work with.
Where you've done that, where you've been able to sort of improve that communication.
Yeah, one way of doing is you often have subject matter experts that are involved, and sometimes they get involved very late. So I'm usually trying to get them at least to be part of a virtual team working with a system. So they are part of a stand-ups in the morning. They get the information about how the situation looks like, what is implemented, what is not implemented, and so on. So they are involved all the way through. That's not always possible, but when it is possible, I'm trying to work towards that goal. So we see ourselves as everybody who works with this system is working towards the same goal, not different goals. And
Yeah.
we are working as one virtual team. We may be in different organization and different supplies and so on, but we together are working towards this goal. So that's one thing.
It
Another
almost
thing
seems like
is
the
when,
United Nations trying to get everyone to understand the speech.
yeah, more or less that. And even sometimes acting as a translator that, well, you have a stand-up and a developer says, well, we have a problem with this. And I say, well, that probably means that we get this consequence for the user.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, because not all developers can translate the technical issue to a consequence for the user, but the subject matter experts doesn't understand the technical aspects, but they understand the consequence for the user. So in that way, you can kind of train the team to understand each other, more or less. So in the beginning, it's hard, but it gets easier and easier.
And that's I think where you come in as the test manager, as the translator, being able to take that term from the developer to the SME and making them understand each other.
Yeah, exactly. And also another way of working this is to include subject matter experts, stakeholders, and so on early on in the testing, so they get to see early versions of the system and try to explain what isn't working and why isn't it working, so that they can focus on the correct way. One great way of achieving this is by pair testing, so that you kind of pair someone that is very fluent in the business with someone who is very fluent in the system, and they can work together to find the bugs that way.
Yeah, and also it's quite sort of lined in with the way of Agile, isn't it? Of getting them in earlier, seeing what's happening, getting them to have that talk about the problems and what's working as well earlier, and getting that confidence and trust. That third eye that someone was talking about earlier as well.
Yeah.
You know, and in fact, you know, moving on to the sort of the next question, you know, is there still a need for test strategies, do you think, as we've sort of moved into a more agile, more communicative world? Do we still really need one?
Yeah, we need a test strategy because we need to make decisions on how we are going to do the testing and the quality assurance. And because much more people are involved, it's more important to make informed decisions. So we make the work as efficient as possible and at the same time gain the confidence needed. So you may not have it as a document, you may have it on the wall. For instance, if you have, if everybody's working in the same area, you can have it on the wall, on the papers and on whiteboards and so on. But you need to make those decisions and you need to make them transparent and visible for everybody involved, so we know what we are doing and why we are doing it, and kind of set the right ambition level, because it's not the the best quality that is possible for every system. It's the correct quality for that system and its purpose.
Yeah.
And you need to set the
Totally
ambition
agree.
level according to that.
Yeah.
But it's not something that the test manager decide by him or herself. It's decision that the team makes, and a lot of people are involved in those decisions, but the decisions need to be made.
And I think that's still probably the test manager has to make those decisions, but it's maybe more of a consensus now than it used to be. I think it was, we write this great big document, it's almost a full-time job maintaining the strategy, and everyone has to follow it to the letter. And the test team has said that this is what it's going to be, and people have accepted it reluctantly. Now what you're describing seems much more collaborative, much more communication, much more involving other people. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And it may be that as a test manager, I kind of lift up the questions that need to be answered and the decisions that need to be made. But we discuss what we should make for decision and how we should do it together, and then we make a decision together. So it's more a collaboration decision rather than I sit on my room and make all the decisions by myself.
So I suppose you've almost become an API layer that all these different departments reach out to. They make a call to Eva with this message, and you translate whatever they've said, the answer they need from the other teams, and send it back in a JSON format, perhaps.
Yes, but I tend to try to move them forward so that we are in the same pond and kind of mix. So it's not really time consuming of just relaying messages. But of course, that depends on the situation. If you're on the same place and how the communication can be done. Because it's different if different teams sit in different locations.
Yeah, I think we've ended up with a lot more asynchronous communications over the last few years, simply with remote working. Even before COVID came along, that people were working further apart, that there were less instances of everyone being in one room, or even in one city, or even in one country. So I think that sort of asynchronicity has made a change to what you have to do as a test manager. So there's a lot more respond, think, send back than maybe there was before, which is just do it.
Yeah, it kind of changes how you should work. And the collaboration platforms like Teams and a lot of others has also changed the possibility of working together, even though you are in different locations.
And I suspect they're going to continue to change for quite some while, because the lessons from this year, last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, will take time to come through in the tools and in the platforms that will help us do this.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, I suppose I've got a sort of a follow-up on there as well. You know, we mentioned about a test strategy, so it's no longer the big manifest document that it might have been. So how do you work with this smaller, more agile test strategy? How do you get the message across? How do you get people to refer to it and follow it? But also, how do you update and change it? What works for you?
Yeah, and this is very dependent on how the organization looks like. If it's a couple of teams and they are located in the same place, I kind of walk around and talk to everybody and kind of implement the test strategy in that way, and have the decisions, the big decisions on whiteboards around the room and so on, so everybody knows what to do with it. If we are in different locations and we have a common collaboration platform like Teams, it probably is on that one, like a wiki or something like that, to document the decisions made. To make everybody do as it said is easier in a way now, because it has been discussed. Everybody understands why we are doing it in a specific way, and often the need of change is raised within the group or and discussed and agreed on a change. So it's much easier, because when you understand why you're doing it in a certain way, it's much easier to actually do it in that way. For instance, you have this with the code review, and I worked with in quite a big project with a lot of different teams. But you had senior developers in each teams, and we had discussed the need for the code review because we also had junior developers in the teams. And it was more or less enforced by using the merge requests and setting up the tools. So they kind of forced the review, but also by the senior developers enforcing it when they were talking developers issues in certain instances. So it was not so much that I enforced it. It was more that, well, we decided that we wanted to do it like that, and we set up tools and so to help us do it in the way we wanted it to be done. And the senior that kind of was along with the ride for the decision, they also enforced it. And when it come a new member in the team, he or she was kind of introduced it. This is how we are doing it, and the rest of the team that have been in the team longer, they enforced it with a new team member as well. So it's much less.
Kept it going.
Yeah, it's much easier in that way. But if you are trying to make a change that nobody buys into, then you have a problem. But then you would have a problem anyway.
I think so. But that links in very nicely with the idea of Agile, DevOps, and other sort of innovations in that space of being sort of a cultural change far more than it is a technical change. The tools help a lot to do it more quickly, but I think it's culture. I think you've indicated that the test manager is very important for sort of driving that culture. And I'd like to move on to the next Menti question with this, which is really, do you need a test manager in an Agile setting anymore? And we're not going to go for lots of different words. We're going to make it yes, no, and maybe. And I have an opinion on this. I'm pretty sure, Eva, you've got an opinion, and hopefully everyone else will have an opinion on this as well. And we'll see how it comes through. Somebody said no already. I'm disappointed. I thought we'd get a bit further in before someone said no.
But you have 5 that says yes and 2 maybes.
I could see the maybes depending on the project, I think. If it was a very sort of clean, defined piece of work that everyone understood, would you need a test manager on it if everyone was already following a well-established test strategy who understood their roles? In the same way that, you may not always need an Agile coach in a team because the team is functioning very well. You may still need the Scrum Master, but if the Scrum Master, if he or she was off sick one day, the team should continue working. If you've got a good test strategy, then maybe is a good answer for that. But it's still quite reassuring that most of the people on this call have said, yes, we still need test managers, because I suspect a lot of us are test managers at heart. So it's good to know that you think there's still a role for us in a more agile, digital, distributed world. I certainly think there is. So we've got those sort of answers on there. And we mentioned about coaching. Do you think the test manager should act as the quality coach?
Yeah, I think it's essential because everybody's involved in testing, but that doesn't mean that everybody knows how to test efficiently or what decisions we need to make and what is possible really. So as a quality coach, I see that we need to coach everybody else in how we should do things. That doesn't mean that we should tell them do it like this, but we need to support them because we have a lot of people who has no experiences of testing, doesn't have any knowledge about how to test efficiently. They have been put in this position and said that well, you should test this. This is very common by subject matter experts, by the way. They are actually working with something that are not related to IT at all, and suddenly they are told, you should test these IT systems to make sure that it's what we need, and they have no idea how to go about it. But you also have people in IT that has no really experiences of testing. They have maybe tried out a bit different things, but they don't know any test design techniques or anything like that. And you need to coach them so they can make a good work in the quality activities. And also to know why we are doing certain things in a certain way. Because otherwise you kind of go back 20 years when testing didn't know everything we know now and did everything quite different, and think that that's how it should be done. We need to do it like we know the best way of doing things, really. And one of them is that there aren't any best way.
Because we've learned so much since then that it is collaboration, it is that communication, it is that sharing of information and guiding people that works, not, right, I want 50 more critical defects found before we've finished our testing.
No, exactly. And also that you can't just look at the requirements of a user stories and try if you are testing only that you actually know if the system is working or not. You need to have a full picture of what it's supposed to do and the goal of a system and its purpose. And not everybody understands that. And if you look at educations, in a lot of educations, formula educations, you are still learned that you should test the requirements and that's it. And that's a very small part of our testing.
I saw a great example like that years ago in one of my first testing projects, where we were spending millions on upgrading all of the IT for this health company. And the system arrived and it was ready to roll out, and it misspelled the company name on the loading page. It was going to appear on 3,500 desktops. And they couldn't understand why we thought that was a problem. And we refused to roll it out because it misspelled the company name. And it took quite a while to have the conversation, because it was scattered around the globe, about the fact that you've destroyed all credibility by the fact that this is going to appear on every desktop and the company name's wrong. Nobody's going to trust what we do. And we finally got the message across. And once we did, it was fixed within maybe an hour. But it was interesting that because it wasn't in the requirements, that was the first line of defense that was thrown up against us. Did you require that we spell your name correctly? No, we didn't actually.
That's self-evident. And there are a lot of requirements that are never formalized because it's self-evident.
Those are the dangerous ones, though, aren't they? The self-evident sort of tests, the self-evident assumptions. And that's where I think you as a test manager can come in, by helping people to see that it may be self-evident, but it's still important as well.
Yeah, it is. I actually had an example in one of the projects that it was an error in the text on the e-service. And it said the wrong time. So I think it was an hour wrong. And an hour later than it should have been. And a lot of people said that, well, that's not very important. What does it matter to have 1 hour wrong? And the people working with the business, they said that, well, if people do then deliver their big trays of fruit and vegetables 1 hour wrong on the Friday, it will stand there in the sun over the weekend and be ruined on the Monday when we open again. So it actually had a very substantial financial loss. That kind of small mistake.
If your train turned up an hour late, I think most people would be, well, if they're in England like me, they wouldn't be surprised. But in other parts of the world where you have reliable train services, they'd probably be quite angry that a train was turned up an hour earlier than it was supposed to, because they'll have missed it. They'd have expected it to be there.
Yeah.
So that's great, Eva. So we're coming towards the end of the conversation with Eva. So if you have any questions, please do put them into the chat window. I do have a few questions already that have come in, but there is time for a few more as well. And really, the first one that I've got on my list here, Eva, is do you think COVID made a change to being the quality coach? Or was it already changing before COVID?
It was already changing before COVID, but COVID made it even more apparent that even though you may be on different sites, you need to be able to communicate and cooperate and be a quality coach. But the way you have done it beforehand, you may have thought that, well, I can do it by just walking around in the room because everybody in the same place, and COVID made it very, very clear that we will not be in the same place, everybody. So we have to find other ways to make the communication and the cooperation work.
That's good. And here's one I actually know. So we had a few conversations, myself and David, before we actually did today's webinar. And I made a note of something that you said before, because I really wanted to come back to it. And you told me about problem solving being different between different groups of people. And it really stuck in my mind. And you said engineers divide, but scientists try and solve the whole picture.
Yeah.
I love that, because it does sort of sum up some of the differences that we see on projects. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about how to deal with the engineers dividing and the scientists trying to solve everything.
Yeah, that's not actually an easy problem to solve. I can give some background to when it became apparent for me, because I worked in a big project with a lot of scientists from a business that were working together with us, and we were always getting stuck on the concept of that we wanted to work and solve one problem at a time, and kind of working agile and do one thing and then expand on it. And we had some pushback from a business who said that, well, but we need to have this thing as well, and they were quite panicked. And after quite a long time, we kind of discovered that we actually had different backgrounds when it came to how to solve problems. And in engineering, you are taught to solve problems by dividing the problem into smaller problems and smaller problems until you can solve a little problem, and then you kind of put them together. That's kind of the engineering way of doing it. And all we that worked with the IT part of the project, we were engineers, and we wanted to work the one problem at a time and focus on some aspect on it. But the other, the business, they were biology experts, they were veterinarian and so forth. So they had another background, and they were taught that the whole is the important part. You need to know every kind of small details to solve a problem. So they didn't have that solve problem by division. And one way that we kind of could overcome this communication gap was when we understood that we actually had different backgrounds in how to solve problems, because then we could discuss around it and find a common ground. But it was very hard before we understood what the main issue was. So I think it's really important when you have people from different backgrounds and different type of trainings to understand what is the basis of their education. How do they think about problem solving?
That's a very good point. That's probably, I think, the top tip I'm taking away from today is that sort of division between fragmenting a problem and trying to solve the whole. And we probably need to manage both I think, to be successful on big projects and even little projects as well. Do you have any other tips like that you might be able to share?
Yeah, I think that sometimes you get as a test manager, well, you shouldn't talk to these people. You should just talk to the testers and so forth. Kind of ignore those kind of restriction and try to form those communication ways with the people you need to talk to, and don't limit yourself, because I think that's the main problem today, that you have a lot of people that think that, well, now everybody is doing the testing, so you don't have any role. But you actually have a very important role. And if you limit yourself to what the other people think you should be doing, you are kind of not doing your job. You're not fulfilling the purpose of your role. And that's true even if you're not called a test manager, because if you are the only people with test experience, you are in fact a test manager, even though you may not be called it. So that's my main.
I think that's a good one. I mean, I don't know about you, but do you think probably test professionals are in a better place to manage that communication, simply because we're so used to talking to so many different groups of people within a project, within an organization, and because we're, well, nosy, we're inquisitive?
Yeah, I think so.
We have a wide definition of what we have to do, rather than just develop, deliver, just manage.
Yeah, and we need to understand the total picture as well. That means that we need to talk to all these different people, and we need to understand their perspective, and that makes us unique, capable of being that quality translator and coach as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Eva. It's been a pleasure as always talking to you. Thank you everyone for turning up and for your questions. And thank you to the technical team behind the scenes for making sure all of this has worked as well. So that's the end of today's webinar. Again, Eva, thank you. And wish everyone a very safe, healthy day, and look forward to welcoming you onto another one of these in the very near future. Bye-bye all.
Bye.